everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. On today's Another View, an update on the work of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation to tell the full story of the historic First Baptist Church, Williamsburg. Founded in 1776, this church is home to one of the oldest African American congregations in America. The church, the Let Freedom Ring Foundation, and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation have joined together to uncover the full story of the enslaved and free blacks who came together to worship God. Stay tuned for an update on their progress on this Another View history lesson that's coming up next, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. I'm going to start today's show with a tribute to a dear family member of WHRO Public Media. Yesterday, we lost Alvin Gatling. He died after an illness. Alvin had been with us for 29 years here at WHRO, and you know what? He did not know a stranger, I tell you. Alvin was an avid bowler. He was the one who always did the brackets for March Madness. He and I would go toe-to-toe over the Ravens versus the Commanders. And after I got married, he always teased me because he knew that I was not a regular cook. And so he would always say, "Did you cook dinner for your husband?" So everyone here at the station has been affected by this loss, but we at the Another View family would like to wish the Gatling family our sincerest condolences and know that there's much love coming from us to you during this time. And also want to remind you all about Refraction of Light. It is a story of the 1940s in Norfolk, Virginia, written by Gene Klein, and it is the story of two young African Americans in the historic neighborhood of Berkeley as they face segregation in the mid-20th century. Now, this play is happening at Zyder's American Dream Theater. It is premieres May 5 through 7 at the Z's main stage theater. There are only 4 performances: Friday, May 5th and Saturday, May 6th at 7:30 p.m. and Saturday, May 6th and Sunday, May 7th at 3 p.m. Registration is required, and the tickets are being offered at the pay what you can rate. And they're also going to have talkbacks with the cast and the creative team following the performance. So for more information, you can go to thez.org and find out more. So in 1776, enslaved and free blacks gathered at Green Spring Plantation, a few miles outside of Williamsburg. They built a brush arbor, a covered clearing, where they could worship God in their own way. That was the beginning of the rich history of the historic First Baptist Church of Williamsburg, which today is home to one of the oldest African American congregations in America. On today's show, an update on the history of the church and the literal uncovering of the past. We welcome back to Another View Connie Matthews-Harshaw, president of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation. Hello, Connie.
Hello.
Glad to have you back. Reverend Dr. Julie Grace. She's an associate minister at First Baptist Church of Williamsburg. Hello, Reverend.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
And Jack Gary, Director of Archaeology with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Hey, Jack. How you
Barbara.
doing?
I'm great.
Good to have you back again. And in full disclosure, I am a member of the board of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation. So before we get an update on the latest happenings, let's remind viewers, listeners, sorry, wrong medium. Let me remind our listeners of the history of church. Here's an excerpt from our own Lisa Godley, a story she did in 2021, which won an award, by the way, about the history of First Baptist Church, Williamsburg.
The discovery in colonial Williamsburg uncovered the foundations of one of the country's oldest African American churches. Founded in 1776 by free and enslaved blacks, First Baptist Church once stood on Nassau Street. In addition to a structure built in 1856, they found a smaller, much older brick foundation, as well as intact post holes from what appears to be the late 1700s. Excavating further revealed a grave site that could hold the keys to America's very beginnings.
We started looking for artifacts, had no idea that there were intact burials there.
For decades, the church's rich beginnings were hidden by asphalt to provide parking for tourists, but are now being uncovered by archaeologists and devices like ground-penetrating radar.
We've got a series of things reflecting back up at us.
Technology has aided in finding 2 brick foundations, the first belonging to a small wood-frame church believed to have been built in the early 1700s. Historic accounts say that structure was destroyed by a tornado in 1834. On top of that foundation, a larger one that matches the brick building built in 1856. This second church stood near the corner of Nassau and Francis Streets for 100 years before it was torn down and paved over in 1957. While radar detects what's beneath the surface, it takes the skillful hands of this archaeological team to dig it out.
I've uncovered a multitude of different types of artifacts. One that I think was pretty interesting is called a fish scale. So basically it's a 3-cent silver coin that we actually excavated out here. For me personally, it's been a very humbling experience just to be a part of something that's going to tell a bigger history here in colonial Williamsburg.
Part of that bigger story lies just a few yards away where archaeologists discovered graves.
We'd love to know whether the graves line up with the first church or whether they are associated with the second church.
To stand in that space and to realize that for so many years that asphalt covered what should have been a burial ground. That's been the most surprising part for me.
Founded in secret by free and enslaved blacks in 1776, the congregation would meet in the brush arbors of the Green Springs plantation.
We're not called by King George. We're not called by the Bishop of Canterbury. We're called by God.
Displaced by the Revolutionary War, the congregation would move once more before the 600 members would settle on Nassau Street. Reverend Julie Grace is among those whose family ties are deeply woven in the church's archival fibers. She was christened in the larger brick church just 8 years before it was torn down in 1957.
I am so excited to go out and be on the grounds and actually be there where your ancestors were and where they worshiped. And also to know that this was a brick church built by black people. I get emotional when I think about it.
With the help of modern science, local descendants are unearthing stories of the rich history woven in the fabric of this country's foundation.
We're hoping that this story will lead the nation to do the right thing, to look around the country and to do what we call historic justice, because the intentional cover-up of the African American story, as well as other groups, you can't just tell history from one perspective. We were all here, and we all contributed, and the story needs to be told.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
It's hard to believe that was 3 years, almost, 2 years ago, that story was done. How many graves do we have now, Connie?
63 is the last count.
Yeah, that's right.
As of last week. Yeah, 63.
Wow. So I want to ask each of you, think back to the first uncovering where we discovered that there were actually graves there. And think back to what your immediate emotion was and tell me. I'm going to start with you, Reverend Grace. Julie.
Well, it was, I was in shock, one thing, to really realize that they have uncovered a body. The next thing I wanted to know, who is that? And is that person related to me? So those were the three things that came to my mind almost immediately. And then the other thing is now we have one. Do we continue to look for others? And are there others?
Yeah. Jack, from a professional perspective.
Yeah, when we first found the first grave, it was, for us, it was a bit technical. It's like, okay, we've identified all the characteristics that make this a grave. And then it switches to, well, wait a minute. This is most likely the ancestor of the community that we're working with. And so that immediately switched to, I got to call Connie. that was really the first thought.
It all comes down to, I got to call Connie.
And because what it really came down to is that the first people that need to know are the descendants in the community. And that, so yeah, that was an immediate switch to, we've got a grave to, this is the community's, and the decisions from here on out are theirs.
Connie, what was your first?
Well, I was angry first, to be honest. How could someone put a parking lot over a burial ground? And then when I got over that in about 5 minutes, the science kicked in. I thought, okay, there's validation. We were told. The oral history has pointed us in this direction anyway, so we were told. But I tell you, until Jack and the team took the top off of one of the graves, that was the most emotional part for me, because I stood there looking down at a skeleton, and I heard this whisper in my voice saying, it took you enough time. We've been waiting for you. And that's when I lost it. I got in the car and I said, oh my God, what in the world have we done? And they've been waiting for us to find them.
To find them.
Yeah.
So you brought up the descendant community. So once the first grave was uncovered, talk about, and I'll start with you, Connie, talk about that process to bring in the descendant community, so that this could be, because it really does belong to them, and how you decided on 3, I believe, graves that would actually be tested.
Well, it started before we discovered the intact burials.
Okay.
We started a descendant group so that we could use, we really didn't know that we were using the National Trust's rubric to get them engaged and to happen, to work with the archaeologists to have this be, I guess community archaeology is what the technical term is. Mm-hmm. But to have them involved at that level, because they were voiceless before that. They would sit on the sidelines and talk about what wasn't going right and what had been done to them and all this, but without the opportunity to be engaged. So once we organized and we got them engaged and we started asking questions, this was before we knew about intact burials. The process just worked out. And it's just like Jack said, we did not make a move without talking to the descendants. Mm-hmm. And when we discovered, you like that royal we, Jack?
It's your project as much as it is ours.
When we discovered the graves, we went to the descendants and we asked them. We knew we could not, we didn't even have a final count then. We had about 30. So we thought it would be reasonable to uncover 10%. Mm-hmm. Because it is a burial ground. People are resting there and supposedly in peace. So we wanted to do one thing, which was to verify that they were of African descent. And we thought with 3 graves we could do that. And we relied on the scientists to tell us which 3.
Okay, so what did you find?
Yeah, so when we got the direction from the community to look at 3 of them, we chose 3 that would give us a spread across the cemetery. And what we found is the preservation of the bone, unfortunately, is pretty poor, but all the other evidence that we were able to find, including DNA evidence from one of the individuals, which came back as a person of sub-Saharan African ancestry, mm-hmm. Along with artifacts that confirm that they were buried in the cemetery at the same time that the first building was being built and used by the congregation, it came together that these are the ancestors. So we used a lot of different lines of evidence as a really interdisciplinary program to get these answers. All lines of evidence point towards these are the ancestors.
Can you describe the 3?
Sure. Yeah, the first individual was it was a male, about I think 5'8", stature. Unfortunately, the bone preservation was really poor on the first individual. Our soils are really acidic, and that is that's something that we have to take into account as we think about the cemetery. The individual was most likely buried in a shroud, in a coffin. All of them were in coffins, and this individual was probably buried in a shroud inside the coffin. Only a single little straight pin was found with this individual. The second individual was also male, about 5'7" in stature, about 35 to 45 years old. First individual, about 35 to 45 years old as well. Male, and that was confirmed by a couple different lines of evidence, including the clothing. So this individual was buried in clothing, vest buttons and trouser buttons, male clothing. The work done by the Institute for Historical Biology at William & Mary showed that there were really pronounced and robust muscle attachments on the legs of this individual, which indicated that they were involved in very strenuous labor throughout their lives. So giving us a glimpse into this individual's life. And then the third individual was a younger male, late teens. And interestingly, this individual was moved from somewhere else, which not sure why, but based on the way the skeleton was lying in the coffin, it's obvious that it had been moved, so that the bones had actually moved around. So they were moved from somewhere else into their spot, whether it's from inside the cemetery to this spot or whether it's from somewhere outside and buried there, also in a coffin. And all of the artifacts, primarily the nails that hold a coffin together, and we won't get into all the details of coffin nails, but suffice to say, you can get a date range based on the shapes of the nails, and they all came back as types that were being used in the first half of the 19th century, which again corresponds to when the church was meeting there.
And there were also some variations in teeth. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or at least one for one of the bodies.
That's right. Yeah. The individual who was the third individual, the younger individual, showed signs of I think nutritional stress would be probably the way we would refer to it at some point in their life, actually earlier in their life, possibly malnutrition or some other.
Yeah, and I thought I read that there was one where it may have indicated that they used their teeth kind of in the work.
Yeah, the second individual.
Part of their.
Yeah, the second individual who, again, we have the skeletal information that shows they were engaged in really heavy labor. Yeah, the teeth were worn down in a way that may indicate that they were, they used their teeth in some way. So yeah, these are the types of details you can get from studying these. But we also the preservation of the bone was really poor. So you reach a limit of how much you can understand. Right.
So Julie, 10% felt like good. You're a descendant. Your family has been with this church for a very long time. Is there a desire for you all to give DNA, or have you all given DNA to see whether or not you can match up to figure out if there's a family member, if it's a part of your family?
I have not, okay, and I'm working on that, okay, but there are others who have gone through the DNA process. Okay. Now, whether or not they've gotten any results that will, match any of the findings, I don't know. But I do know that the descendants are really interested in finding out whether or not, they're related to those people in the grave. But we do understand that it's not possible to do that.
To do all 64.
To do all 64, yes. And so from my perspective, if we can't actually detract enough to tell us whether or not, is that my descendant or is that your descendant, then I would prefer that we just, we just let them, they've told their story, they've done their work for us, and I say, just let them rest.
What is the conversation that's going on within the descendant community? I mean, does everybody pretty much feel that same way, or is there a difference in perspective in terms of what should happen?
I don't know about the percentage, but I do know that there are some people who want to go further. They want you to, dig up the 60,
All 60.
and let's find out who they belong to, And so those are the kinds of conversations. But I think for the most part, because when we found out about the one body, and we were trying to reach out to the descendants, we had maybe a group of people who we were just calling people, getting them to come out to the meeting so that we can discuss and find out, what the information is that they want to share with us. What are we going to do with this information? And so everyone was excited. In the beginning, everyone was excited. I think it died down for a little bit, but when you said the 63, then everybody's coming back.
It comes in waves, right?
It comes in waves, because there was a time when we were trying to reach out to the descendants, and they weren't responding to us.
That's right.
If they knew who was talking to them, if they knew the person talking to them was a descendant, then they would respond. But we involved the students from William and Mary to help us make some phone calls, and they did not get a good response at all.
Connie, where does that hesitancy or that lack of trust come from?
Well, it comes from history. It comes from a long history with colonial Williamsburg. It comes from mistrust. It comes from they haven't effectively negotiated the trust barrier. It's funny, and I don't want to just talk about colonial Williamsburg and William and Mary. I'm someone also that they had to learn to trust. And I was just informed last week that I'm an honorary descendant.
Whatever that means.
Whatever it means. But because we're having a meeting on this Saturday. And it's a closed discussion. Most of our other meetings have been open. We open them to the press. We open them to the full community. But the descendant community has said to me, we have some young people that want us to dig up all of the bodies. We understand and respect the older descendants' position that we want them to rest in peace. But, we have some more questions. Now, we had Dr. Blakey, we had Dr. Jones, we had Dr. Fleskes all talk to us. But, we were like, boy, sit down. I want to ask a real question. Is that my grandmama? So we're going to do that. We're going to give them this last opportunity to talk about that because it is emotional. It's emotional for a lot of them. And so once they do that, then we need to talk about how we're going to memorialize that space.
Well, that was going to be my next question, but hang on a second.
Okay.
757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Are you a descendant of First Baptist Church, Williamsburg? We would love to hear from you and to hear your story. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Or if you just have general questions, give us a call, join our conversation. So we have 67. Before I ask you kind of what you're going to do with them, 63, sorry. Jack, are you going to expand any more, or have you hit the end of the burial site?
Yeah. So we've excavated over 90% of the footprint of the area that the church owned, and we can see the fence line that outlines the cemetery. So we feel very confident that we have the full extent of the cemetery. So we don't need to expand anymore. So our 63 number, we feel very confident in that is the number of people buried in this cemetery.
Okay. So, Connie, what's the plan? What are we going to do with the bodies?
yeah, Connie, what's the plan?
What are you going to do with the families
that are buried there? What was that number you told the descendants to call? We can get to it.
Exactly.
We're going to talk to them this weekend, and we're going to open up the discussion about how they want to pay honor those that are buried, those 63. I think that's a significant symbol. We're working with the Montpelier descendant group. We're working with the memorial task force of that group to talk about how you do that and how you do it so that it's consistent with the fabric of colonial Williamsburg. And that it also rises to be one of the areas that will be most visited. It needs to be a contemplative site. It needs to be a prayerful site, a sacred place. So we're going to talk to them this weekend about that. And then we're going to work with Colonial Williamsburg to see if we can make it happen. before October 2026. No pressure, Jack.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But October 2026 is when we celebrate the
250th anniversary.
Yeah, so that's a very significant time. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. If you're just joining us, it's in Another View history lesson on the historic First Baptist Church of Williamsburg. My guests include Connie Matthews Harshaw, president of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation, Reverend Julie Grace, an associate minister at First Baptist Church Williamsburg, and director of archaeology with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, Mr. Jack Gary. In full disclosure, again, I am a board member of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation. When the two of you go to church on Sunday, since you're both members of First Baptist, is service different because you know this history? I mean, in other words, when you walk in the building, is there a different kind of feel? Because both of you have lived other places, been to other churches, joined other churches, but now you're home. Is it different for you, Julie?
It is. When I compare, I lived in Atlanta for a number of years, and I compare how I felt when I walked through those church doors. It's a different feeling. It's a feeling of being proud of where you are, proud of this church. And I'm always amazed when I think about how we got there, starting in the brush harbor, in the woods, being moved. And this is how I see God working with First Baptist. He brought us from the woods to Scotland Street. And when you look at the buildings and the nails that you found, you see the work that they did without the technology that we have today. A brick church back in the day, that's amazing. So when I walk through the doors and I look at the artifacts that we have and the pictures that we have when you come in, yes, I feel full of African Americans who struggled to get to this place. And I feel proud that I'm a part of it. Yes.
What about you, Connie?
Oh, yeah. It is a feeling of pride to walk in and to know that the story didn't just start on Scotland Street. And you start to think about all of the stuff that happened and everything that they had to go through.
Yes.
And, we come in with our nice hats and our, Sarah Jessica's on, and we're thinking, oh, we're just all of that and more.
Yes.
And then you stop for a moment when they sing one song. One song like I Surrender All, or where they start, singing Amazing Grace, and you start to visualize what it must be like for the enslaved and the free blacks back then to fight, to worship, to just do that. So it's something that you have to experience, because when you're sitting there, you just, the older women in the church, in the black church especially, when there are no words, they just say, We have a lot of those moments, don't we, Julie?
Yes, indeed. And I would give you guys, both of you, the opportunity to let people know that you don't have to be African American to come to First Baptist. Is that true?
That's
Julie?
true. That's true. We have several Caucasians who are members of our church.
We have German, we have Japanese, we have Chinese.
Yes. So the door is open.
And First Baptist has been key throughout the history. From the beginning all the way. You were active in the civil rights movement, active in things that are happening now. Talk a little bit about that history.
Well, we had some of the very first elected officials, John Kerry, who was a descendant. His family still goes there. They just had their newest baby, I think about 4 months ago. Yeah. We had one of the weddings of the century that happened there, Elizabeth Harris and Dr. Moten. Of course, Mr. Harris owned the cheap store in Williamsburg and was one of the wealthiest African Americans in the country. And he sent his son to study neuroscience at Harvard. Those are the stories that are not told. And when we walk in the doors of that church on Scotland Street, and we think back to that structure on Nassau Street, that 1856 building, where you had very affluent African Americans here.
Yes.
And, you know, we taught our folks, we taught our children, we ran schools, we had all kinds of things happening in the community, and we were very well respected. You know, Reverend Collins, who brought Dr. King here. You know, we had our pastor Shields, who brought Rosa Parks here. I mean, on the way, Opal, what's her name? Davis, grandmother of Juneteenth. Yes. She, of all the stops, she picked First Baptist on her way to Washington to march for Juneteenth.
Oh, wow.
So it seems to be the place where everybody comes, and it is very prideful.
Yeah.
You sit there and you're thinking, okay, Bishop Curry, before he married the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, he was at First Baptist in the pulpit, trying to act like he was Episcopal, but he wasn't. He preached a Baptist sermon that morning. So yeah, it still has a very, very important place in the community. And with the newly approved African American Heritage Tour or path.
Good. Glad you brought that up.
Will be the first stop on that tour in Williamsburg.
So Williamsburg, tell us a little bit about that. So Williamsburg is starting a heritage trail throughout the city, correct?
Yes. There are about 14 stops on there. African American. The community is also involved with the city in doing that. And First Baptist has 2 stops on there, the one on Scotland Street, and then, of course, the original site over on Nassau Street, the First African Baptist Church. So the story starts, 18th century it ends, but then we pick up the 19th century and we run it through the 21st century over on Scotland Street. So
757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions have you been to First Baptist Church Williamsburg? Have you rung the bell, which we're getting ready to talk about that experience? Give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Let's talk about that bell. I believe it or not, as long as I've been working with this organization, I have yet to ring the bell.
Don't say it. Don't say
I know.
Don't say it.
I can't believe it. I have not rung the bell yet. I have got to go and ring the bell.
We're going to take your board card.
But I know, isn't that awful? But Julie, tell us why the bell. Tell us the history of the bell and why it's important.
The bell, I used to live in Braxton Court, right on the corner. And I could go out of my back door and stand on my porch and see the church. And there were Sundays when you could hear the bell ringing. And when we heard the bell, my grandfather, James Andrew Jones, he was the chairman of the deacon board. He hit his cane on that floor, and that meant you got 5 minutes to get out of here and go to church, okay? and he wasn't going to ask you. Saturday night, we were ironing our clothes because you couldn't do anything on Sunday.
Yeah.
You couldn't they cooked on Saturday night. We ironed our clothes. And if we didn't iron our clothes Saturday night,
you went to church.
You went to church. Anyway, that's right. But I'd also like to give you a peek of what it was like to grow up in the church.
Sure.
We had wonderful people who cared for us in the church and at our schools at Bruton Heights. At church, we had a recreation every Friday and Saturday night, and the age groups were, of course, I was the youngest, and so at every Friday or Saturday night at 9:00, all of the young people had to go, and of course, I was the only young person there.
You got some feelings about this, don't you?
I've always had feelings about that. I've cried from the church all the way home every Friday and every Saturday night. Dennis Gardner, you interviewed him. He was the one who was in charge of the recreation, and at 9:00 he would come tap me on my shoulder and say, "Julie, he was really nice because he hated to do that because he knew I was going to cry." But he would just say, "Julie, it's time," and and then the face would drop and the lips would swell, and then you get there. But I was obedient.
So that would allow the older kids to have some time to hang out.
I
Is
know
that
it,
right?
and I don't
Okay.
know why they needed all this privacy.
This is what I think about when I see that photo that's made its way around the world with Julie laying in the lap of Hulan Willis on her christening date. I'm thinking to myself, and all the mothers in the church would say, "She just grown." She just grown.
That's right, because you were christened 8 years before the church was moved.
Yes,
right.
yes.
So your family's been there for a long time.
Forever. Alexander Dunlop. He was.
Just take a minute.
It's okay. It's okay. And this just goes to show, though, why the work you all are doing is so important.
Yes.
That moment right there, because it is about humanity and it means something.
Yes.
And the science is important.
Yes.
But it's so much bigger than the science. That's why the relationship that we have with the archaeologist is just amazing. I mean,
I have adopted him. I know.
he's in the family. He's in the family.
I'm waiting for my descendant card.
I got one, Jack. You probably get one too.
But tell us about your godfather. Was it your godfather? You were ready to speak about.
No,
Dunlop.
Dunlop. I'm sorry.
Alexander Dunlop.
Okay.
He was one of the richest men in Williamsburg. He was free. He was not a slave. He had a thriving business, and people respected him. He had a seating before President Johnson, and he also was members of leading organizations whose mission was to raise the concerns of the black people in Williamsburg to Washington, D.C. And that's what he loved to do. And he did it well. It made us proud. And also to show his to show his family the love, and to show his family to the world. When they died, he had these tombstones made to represent each of them.
And didn't he purchase his wife?
He did.
He purchased his wife, who was enslaved.
Yes. Wow. And he did that because for $350. Can you imagine?
That's a lot of money at that time.
That was a lot of money. Absolutely. Let's talk to Sherry in Portsmouth. Hi, Sherry. You're on the air.
Hello, Barbara.
Hi.
I wanted to just say hello to all of your guests there and to stress the importance of what they're doing. When you mentioned Miss Opal Lee, I had to call in. I'm in Juneteenth, Virginia, and I was with her when she was at the church a couple years ago, and I've always kind of want to make people appreciate that this history of this region, Tidewater, Hampton Roads, doesn't recognize any boundaries of cities, states, or counties or towns. It really belongs to this region because who we are as a nation today started here in 1607, and certainly in 1619 when the first Africans from Angola arrived. The who we are today, the blueprint of who we are today in 2023 started right here in our backyards, and that's extremely important. Because as we look at the history, we are looking at it from our perspective, and that makes a big difference. One point that I always like to make is that when the freed enslaved folks, that was the beginning of our black middle class. And so we can talk about the black middle class going back to the 17th, 18th century, as opposed to the way it's always been taught, that it didn't really happen until the 19th century. So as we are able to tell the history, interpret the history from our perspective, we get to be able to create that healing and, kind of bring the truth to the forefront that will ultimately allow us to kind of move forward. Our mission statement is to help America heal from the wounds of slavery without shame or blame. And the work that you folks are doing is a part of what I believe will make that happen. So my hat's off to you and thank you.
Sherry Bailey, thank you so very much. Sherry has been spearheading Juneteenth and that celebration for years and really been working very, very hard with that. So Sherry, thanks so much for calling in. We appreciate that. One of the narratives, and I want to get perspective from each of you. this story allows us to tell a different story about Black people in this country. Meaning that a lot of the narrative, a lot of the time is we had enslaved people and they were treated so badly, and I'm not negating any of that. But what I am saying is that this allows us to tell a more complete story. Would you agree, Jack? Let's start with you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the strongest stories of what we see archaeologically is the story of community, enslaved and free. This church community came together to create the first building on this site. And when you look at archaeologically what they had to do to create this building, I mean, this is no small task. And
it was a brick building. Right?
Well, the first building was frame.
Okay.
Yeah, the second was brick. But the landscape that they were working with was not good. This was not a good piece of land to build on. But yet they still built their first building. They buried their families there. And then what always amazes me is that in 1834, when the first building was destroyed by a tornado, it's called out specifically in a newspaper. Right, that building is called out specifically in a newspaper. That tells you just how important this church is on that landscape by that time. And that's coming from a group of people that are coming together with limited resources. And here we are sitting today, the church still exists today. That to me has been the archaeological finds that are interesting: bricks, nails. We find that stuff all the time.
As a matter of fact, speaking of finding things, Lisa, our producer, wanted me to ask you about the coin that helped you identify the time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so one of the key pieces of evidence that allowed us to state definitively we have found the first church building, the first building that the congregation built for themselves and worshipped in, was a coin dating to 1817, and it was found underneath a portion of paving that was laid down to get people from Nassau Street into the church without having to walk through mud. And that coin gives us the date for when we know definitively that building is there, and that aligns with all the other evidence too. So that was the piece that allowed us to then put out a statement saying that we found it, in which then we always say that it got tweeted 80 million times.
That's a lot of tweets.
That's a lot of tweets.
That's a lot of
tweets. How does this help us change the narrative or enhance the narrative? Let's put it that way.
When you look at Prince George Street and Scotland Street back in the day, you will find a hospital was there. Dr. Blayton's hospital was there. They had barber shops, we called them beauty parlors, during that time. There were all kinds of Black businesses, all up and down Scotland Street, and went to Olmsted Avenue. Mm-hmm. And so that tells you, that gives you a very good picture of everyone was not enslaved, and there were wonderful successes. There were all different kinds of business people, men and women, mm-hmm. And it was a success, and it was encouraging to the group of young people my age. Mm-hmm. It was encouraging to see the success. And, when I was growing up, we stayed in our communities. We very seldom went out of the community unless there was something special, and going to school. Mm-hmm. And so I was not introduced to this ugliness about slavery and mistreatment until I was about 14 or 15 years old when I went to work. I started working at the Williamsburg Lodge as a busgirl. That was my first experience of how some people, who were not of color, felt about people who were of color. And it was quite an experience. Mm. And it opened my eyes. And from that point on, I began to look at the costumes that they wore during that time. Mostly Black people wore those costumes. And it reminded me of maybe, Caucasians came there to experience what it would have been like to have Black people serving them, waiting on them. It's different now because now you see you see everybody. And I vowed, I said, the first opportunity I get to get out of Williamsburg, I am out.
Yeah.
And I did that when my daughter graduated from high school. She went to North Carolina A&T. In about 4 or 5 months, I got a transfer of government job, went to Alexandria, Fort Myer, and then went to the Headquarters Forces Command in Georgia. And the only reason that I'm back in Williamsburg today is because I heard about the tombstones. And I came to visit. My girlfriend Linda said, let's go over to Bruton Heights because they're doing some things. They've got our paraphernalia over there. So we went and we looked and we ran into, what's her name that passed? That Freedom Ring. I can't think of it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Rowe?
Anyway, yes.
Okay.
Linda Rowe.
Linda Rowe, the historian.
Yes.
Yeah.
She saw us and she said, well, what are y'all doing? I said, well, we're just looking around. She said, go over to that building over there. There is a lady over there, and I'm trying to think of her name.
That's okay. Move the story
okay.
along. Yeah.
Well,
And
you know
she
what?
said,
Let me stop you though, because I want to talk about Linda Rowe. Linda Rowe was not an African American.
Right.
Yeah.
She was a white woman. She was also she had a seat on our board. She had studied First Baptist Church for 50 years. And she is that's what sparked my interest, because I was going to church, typical go to church, and unless they were serving food, I'm out, I'm going back, to work, But Linda, just like she talked to Julie and the group about the history of the area, she's the one that sparked my interest because she knew everything about this church and its influence and its history. She was the one who I said, okay, all right, so the land was donated by the Cole family. So, Linda, where are those people? I want to know what that story is and whether or not it parallels the story of the oral histories that have been passed down.
And the Cole family was
the white
one
family. They were the white
gave
family.
The original building for the church.
Well, they gave the land.
The land.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Okay.
apparently, now that the archaeologists have done their work, we know that the congregants were most likely to build that building. Now you have to understand and feel a sense of pride to know that in that time you had a Black enslaved minister, a wealthy white person working together under an umbrella of faith to make this happen. Something we did was right.
And the white gentleman was overcome by the music and the service that he heard in the Brush Arbor, which was why it led him to say, you can have this land.
We get our church on Sunday morning, get to stomping and the drums playing. And he was attending Bruton Parish, which is where the enslaved worshiped with their masters before. And it was a pretty stoic state, and we tease them even today. We say to Chris Epperson, y'all finish with that. Come on over and have some real church. But anyway, so it is a joke in the community, but the community has come together around this like nothing I've seen.
Connie, I want to ask you one thing because we only got about 5 minutes left, and I probably will open up a can of worms in this 5 minutes. But Colonial Williamsburg has transformed immensely from when they started in terms of how they told the history to where they are today in terms of trying to make sure that it is an inclusive living museum. You had a lot to do with that. You and Cliff Fleet. I'm going to give the two of you that credit because you've had some pretty tough conversations.
We have. We've had some difficult conversations. It started out with me saying to him that if he's in the business of history, then I'm embarrassed for him because you can't tell half of a story. We were all here at the same time in the same place, and how do you just tell it from an Anglican perspective? And he said, well, I heard about you before I met you, offered you breakfast. So he said, I heard I can't pull any punches and I've got to be straight. And I said, yeah, you do, because this is too important This story is too important, and it's an opportunity. And I said, even if you're an undergraduate business major, you're missing an entire segment of the American market, because if you tell the whole story, all of my black friends are coming. So I don't understand what the problem is. Mm-hmm. And he poor Cliff, he probably sees my number now. He wants to not answer my call. But he's been amazing. And Catherine Rowe, I keep saying that you have to have all of the right people. And I say, Reverend Grace, I say, look at God, because he put all of the right people in the right place at the right time.
So there is, before we run out of time, there is a documentary called History Half Told is Untold that I very proudly was an executive producer on, and we aired it here on WHRO TV. Mm-hmm. But it is available for groups, civic groups, if we would like us to come out and share it. Mm-hmm. How do people contact you to set that up?
They can hit our website, or they can contact us directly by calling us on 202. Okay, I don't remember the number.
The website is Let Freedom Ring.
Right.
LetFreedomRingFoundation.org.
We will make sure that and we've shown it everywhere. It's being shown on Byron Allen's media group, but we will show it for personal and small groups if they just contact us.
So if you want more history, apparently we're going around showing it to many, many people, and they're very, very excited about it.
Yes.
So what's the next step, guys? We got 2 minutes left. What would you like to see happen next?
Well, for me, I would like to see the look on the face of the descendant community when they get a chance to sit there and pay their respects to those 63 people, and the start of us beginning to tell their story. Absolutely. That's what I'd like to see.
Yes. Julie?
I would like to see... I would like to see that also. And I can't wait to see the worship and the praise and the thanks, to God for bringing us to this place in history.
Okay. Yes. And Jack?
Well, there's things I want to see archaeologically. With the study of the artifacts, we've got a year back in the lab just looking at all the data from this excavation. But what I really want to see is this type of partnership, this collaboration, this community-engaged aspect of the project continue through all of our projects at Colonial Williamsburg. That's what I really want to see. That's where this needs to go. It's beyond a single project.
And I know you guys are going to be on the Today Show.
We are.
And do you have a date?
June 5th.
June the 5th.
Well, we don't know if that's the air date, but we know that they'll be down in Williamsburg crawling around and talking to all of us, and we're excited about that.
Okay. That's Connie Harshaw, Julie Grace, and Jack Gary. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will continue to update everyone as this progress continues. And thank you so much for listening to Another View today. If you'd like to hear this show again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and you can download the podcast. And don't forget to sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. Guess what? Next week on Another View, it's another history lesson with the inevitable humanitarian and keeper of all things Jefferson, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. Clay and I are going to be mixing it up. You do not want to miss this conversation, trust me. And that will be next Thursday at noon. And don't forget that he will also be at the Roper Theater on next Wednesday evening if you'd like to attend there. And our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn, we haven't heard that name in a long time. Yay, Todd. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone. And let's get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.